I want you to watch something with me, not on a screen, in your memory. Picture the moment right before a woman walks away from stability. Her face is calm, sometimes even radiant. She has made a decision. She is choosing herself, choosing freedom, choosing authenticity. Now jump forward exactly 8 months. The same woman is sitting in her car at 11 p.m. in a grocery store parking lot. She is not moving. She has been there for 40 minutes. The engine is running because she cannot afford the emotional cost of turning it off and going inside. This is not a metaphor. This is pattern recognition. And what happened between those two moments reveals something Nietzsche understood about human nature that modern culture has completely forgotten. I have spent 12 years studying the mechanics of psychological collapse, not the dramatic kind you see in movies, the quiet kind, the kind that happens when someone mistakes a feeling for a philosophy. 6 months ago, I received a message from a woman I will call Rachel. She is 34. She has 2 children. And she had just made what she called the bravest decision of her life. She left her marriage, not because of abuse, not because of betrayal, because she felt incomplete. She felt like she was living someone else's story. She had been reading about authentic living, about finding your true self, about the courage to choose happiness. She wanted me to tell her she was right. Instead, I told her about something Nietzsche called the eternal recurrence, the idea that you must live your life as if every choice you make will repeat forever, that you must want your decisions to echo through eternity. She did not understand what I meant. 8 months later, she does, because Rachel is now living in what I call the collapse point. It is the exact moment when the fantasy of independence collides with the physics of reality, and it destroys people who are not prepared for it. Here is what nobody tells you about that collision. It is not sudden. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive with a crisis. It arrives on a Tuesday afternoon, when your child has a fever, and you realize you do not know which urgent care center takes your insurance. It arrives when your kitchen sink backs up, and you stand there staring at the black water rising, genuinely unsure who to call or how much it should cost. It arrives in the silence after you put your children to bed, and you understand that there is nobody coming to tag you out, that tomorrow will be exactly like today, and the day after that, and the day after that. Nietzsche wrote that man must have chaos within him to give birth to a dancing star. But here is what he also knew. Most people do not have chaos within them. They have disorder. And disorder does not create stars. It creates collapse. Let me show you what this looks like in real time. Rachel's first month was exactly what she expected. She felt light. She felt powerful. She decorated her new apartment exactly how she wanted. She ate dinner at 9 p.m. because she could. She stayed up late reading because nobody was waiting for her in bed. This is what psychologists call the honeymoon phase. But that term is too soft. What is really happening is that the brain is flooded with dopamine from novelty, from breaking rules, from the sheer chemical rush of change. Robert Greene writes about this in the 48 Laws of Power. He calls it the intoxication of action, the feeling that movement equals progress, that change equals growth. It does not. By month 2, Rachel started noticing things, small things. Her daughter was asking when they would see Daddy again. Not crying, just asking. Every night. In that flat, persistent way, children ask questions when they are trying to solve a puzzle they do not have the language for. Her car was making a sound. Not a loud sound. A quiet clicking that happened when she turned left. She ignored it because she did not know what it meant, and she did not want to know what it would cost. Her sink started draining slowly. Then, slower. Then, not at all. These are not tragedies. These are Tuesdays. But here is what Nietzsche understood that modern culture does not. Life is not a series of mountaintop moments. Life is a series of Tuesday afternoons. And the person who cannot handle Tuesday cannot handle anything. Carl Jung had a different way of explaining this. He talked about the shadow. The part of yourself you refuse to acknowledge. The part you project onto other people so you do not have to look at it directly. Rachel's shadow was not her ex-husband. It was her own dependence. She did not leave because she was strong enough to be alone. She left because she believed she would not have to be. She had absorbed a very specific cultural message. That independence means freedom from burden. That authentic living means doing only what feels good. Schopenhauer called this the tyranny of the will, the belief that wanting something makes you entitled to it. That desire equals deserving. It does not. By month 3, Rachel's life had developed a rhythm, but it was not the rhythm she expected. It was the rhythm of constant low-level crisis, not disasters, difficulties. The washing machine breaking, her son getting sent home from school with lice, her babysitter canceling 3 hours before a work meeting she could not miss. She started posting on social media. Not the aesthetic content she used to share. Confessional content. Raw content. Videos of her crying in her car. Captions about how hard single motherhood is. How exhausting it is to do everything alone. And here is where the pattern gets interesting. The comments section filled with support, with validation, with other women sharing their own stories of exhaustion and overwhelm, and Rachel felt better, for about 6 hours, because what Nietzsche understood, and what modern therapeutic culture refuses to acknowledge, is this. Validation does not solve problems. It rewards the inability to solve them. When you broadcast your suffering and receive sympathy, your brain gets a hit of oxytocin, connection hormone, bonding chemical. It feels like healing, but it is not healing. It is pain management, and the more you rely on it, the weaker your capacity for actual problem-solving becomes. This is what I call the validation trap, and it is one of the core mechanisms of the collapse point. But there is something deeper happening here. Something that connects Rachel's story to a pattern I have seen repeat across hundreds of cases. And it has everything to do with what Nietzsche warned about when he talked about the last man. The person who has eliminated all struggle from their definition of the good life. I will show you exactly what I mean. Month 4 is when Rachel called me. Not to ask for advice, to tell me I was wrong. She had been watching my content for 2 years. She understood the principles. She knew about the shadow. She knew about eternal recurrence. She thought she was different. She thought understanding the philosophy meant she had transcended the pattern. This is what Nietzsche called slave morality. The belief that knowing about virtue makes you virtuous. That reading about strength makes you strong. It does not. Rachel was angry. She told me that men do not understand what women face, that the world is built for male success and female failure, that she was working twice as hard as her ex-husband and getting half the recognition. I asked her one question. Can you pay your rent this month without help? She hung up. 3 weeks later, she called back. This time she was not angry, she was scared. Because she could not pay her rent. Not without borrowing from her parents. And borrowing meant admitting that the brave choice she had made was collapsing under its own weight. Here is what was happening in Rachel's nervous system during this time. Her amygdala was in a state of constant activation, fight or flight. Every unexpected bill became a threat. Every crying child became an emergency. Every broken appliance became a catastrophe. This is not weakness. This is biology. When you are in chronic stress, your prefrontal cortex goes offline. The part of your brain that does planning, that does rational decision-making, that does impulse control. What takes over is the limbic system, the survival brain, the part that only knows two modes, react or collapse. Daniel Kahneman calls this System 1 thinking, fast, emotional, pattern-based. It is the mode your brain uses when it is trying to survive, not thrive. And here is the trap. Once you are in System 1, every decision you make reinforces the state you are in. You stop planning because you are reacting. You stop solving because you are surviving. You stop building because you are barely standing. Epictetus wrote that it is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. But modern culture has twisted this into something toxic. It has turned reaction into identity, struggle into status, suffering into content. Rachel was no longer trying to solve her problems. She was performing them. By month 5, the performance had become her reality. She had started a TikTok account dedicated to single motherhood. She posted daily, sometimes multiple times a day. Her content was raw, unfiltered, real, and it was growing fast. Because pain is algorithmically optimized content. Suffering scales. Vulnerability goes viral. She was getting thousands of views, hundreds of comments, dozens of messages from women thanking her for being so brave, for being so real, for showing them they were not alone. And Rachel mistook this for community. But here is what Robert Greene would tell you about this dynamic. It is parasocial, it is transactional, it is not connection, it is consumption. The women in her comments were not helping her. They were using her to validate their own choices, to feel less alone in their own collapse. And every time Rachel posted, she was reinforcing the neural pathways of helplessness. Training her brain that broadcasting pain is more rewarding than solving it. This is the second core mechanism of the collapse point. I call it performance dependency. When your identity becomes fused with your struggle, solving the struggle becomes an existential threat. If you are no longer the struggling single mother, who are you? If you fix your life, what do you post about? If you become competent, what makes you relatable? This is the trap Nietzsche warned about when he wrote about resentment, the psychological state where your suffering becomes your superiority, where your weakness becomes your moral authority. The person trapped in resentment does not want solutions. They want validation that the world is unfair to them specifically. Rachel had entered this state completely. By month 6, I watched her content shift in a very specific way. She stopped talking about her own choices. She started talking about systemic problems, the patriarchy, the economy, the lack of social support for mothers. All of these things are real. All of these things matter. But notice what happened. Her locus of control shifted from internal to external. The problem was no longer what she had done. It was what had been done to her. This is what psychologists call learned helplessness. The state where you have tried to solve a problem so many times and failed that you stop believing solutions are possible. Martin Seligman studied this with dogs. He put them in cages and shocked them. At first, the dogs tried to escape. They jumped. They bit the bars. They fought. Then, he opened the cage doors. The dogs could leave whenever they wanted, but they did not leave. They just lay there, taking the shocks, because they had learned that their actions did not matter. Rachel's cage door was open. She could change her content. She could stop performing. She could focus on solving instead of broadcasting. But she did not, because she had learned that solving was harder than sympathy. That competence was lonelier than community. That strength was less rewarding than struggle. And this brings us to the moment I need to be honest with you about. I made a mistake with Rachel. I assumed that showing someone the pattern would break them out of it. That philosophical understanding would translate to behavioral change. I was wrong, because Nietzsche did not just write about patterns. He wrote about character. And character is not built through understanding. It is built through repeated action under pressure. Rachel understood everything I taught her. She could explain the validation trap. She could identify performance dependency. She could quote Nietzsche. But she could not do her own laundry without crying about it on camera. This is the difference between knowledge and wisdom, between reading philosophy and living it. And it reveals something about the modern crisis that nobody wants to admit. We have created a culture that treats emotional literacy as a substitute for operational competence, where feeling your feelings is considered more valuable than fixing your problems, where understanding why you are struggling is treated as equivalent to no longer struggling. It is not. Month 7 is when things got worse. Rachel's ex-husband filed for custody modification, not because he was cruel, because he was concerned. Their daughter had started showing signs of what child psychologists call environmental anxiety. Stomach aches before school, nightmares 3 times a week, difficulty concentrating. The pediatrician asked if there had been any major changes at home. Rachel's first response was rage. How dare he question her parenting? How dare he use the children as weapons? How dare he suggest she was not capable? But here is what Carl Jung would point out about this reaction. Rage is often a defense mechanism against shame. When someone touches a wound you have not admitted exists, anger is the shield that protects you from looking directly at it. Deep down, Rachel knew her daughter was struggling. She knew because her daughter had been asking to stay at Daddy's house more often, not because she loved him more, because his house felt stable. Stability is not exciting. It is not authentic. It is not aesthetically interesting. But to a 7-year-old nervous system, it is oxygen. Children do not need their parents to be happy. They need them to be regulated. They need predictable routines, consistent boundaries, adults who can handle Tuesday without having an emotional event. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But he was talking about leadership, about the necessity of structure over affection. Modern parenting has inverted this completely. Now the goal is to be liked by your children, to be their friend, to never make them uncomfortable. But children do not need friends. They have friends. They need adults who can contain their chaos so they can develop in safety. Rachel was not containing chaos. She was creating it. Her home had no structure. Dinner happened whenever. Bedtime was negotiable. Rules existed until Rachel was too tired to enforce them, which was most days. This is not gentle parenting. This is absent parenting disguised as flexibility. And the children were paying the price. Jung called this the parent's unfulfilled life living through the child. But it works in reverse, too. The parent's unresolved chaos infecting the child's development. When Rachel got the custody papers, she did what she always did. She posted about it. She filmed herself, crying, reading sections of the document out loud, talking about betrayal, about being punished for choosing herself, about the system being rigged against mothers. Her comment section exploded. Thousands of women rallying to support her, calling her ex a narcissist, a manipulator, a typical man using money and lawyers to hurt a woman who dared to leave. None of them knew him. None of them knew the situation. None of them asked if maybe, possibly, there was another side to the story. Because in the tribal dynamics of online outrage, nuance is betrayal. You are either with us or against us. Either you validate the narrative or you are the enemy. This is what Nietzsche meant when he wrote about the herd. The group that enforces conformity through shame, that punishes independent thought, that rewards emotional performance over rational analysis. Rachel had found her herd, and the herd was making her weaker. Here is what I mean by that. Every time Rachel posted her pain and received validation, her brain released oxytocin and dopamine, connection and reward. It felt like support. But it was not making her more capable. It was making her more dependent on the attention, on the validation, on the performance. She had accidentally built a business model out of her collapse. Her following grew. Brands started reaching out. Small ones at first. Companies selling self-care products and therapy apps and journals for overwhelmed mothers. She started making money. Not much, but enough to feel like she was building something. Except what she was building was a cage, because now her income depended on staying in crisis. Her relevance depended on continued struggle. Her entire identity was fused with being the woman who left and regretted it, but could not admit it. This is what Robert Greene calls the image you project versus the reality you live. And when those two things diverge too far, the cognitive dissonance becomes unbearable. Month 8 was when Rachel hit what I call the recognition threshold. This is the moment when you can no longer pretend you do not see the pattern, when the gap between what you are performing and what you are experiencing becomes too obvious to ignore. She was alone in her apartment. It was 2 a.m. Both children were asleep. She had just finished editing a video about her custody battle, making herself cry on camera, crafting the perfect caption about resilience. And then she looked around her apartment, dishes piled in the sink from 3 days ago, laundry overflowing from the basket, mail scattered across the counter, unopened because half of it was bills she could not pay yet. Her life was not content. Her life was chaos. And for the first time in 8 months, she allowed herself to think the thought she had been running from. I made a mistake, not a small mistake, not a correctable mistake, a life-altering, children-affecting, irreversible mistake. She had traded a stable foundation for a feeling, and the feeling had lasted 6 weeks, and the consequences were going to last forever. This is the moment Schopenhauer wrote about when he discussed the pendulum of existence. We swing between pain and boredom, between the suffering of want and the emptiness of having. Rachel had wanted freedom. She got it. And it was empty, because freedom is not the absence of obligation. Freedom is the capacity to choose your obligations and then have the strength to honor them. She had chosen, but she did not have the strength. And now she was living in what Nietzsche called bad conscience. The psychological state where you know you have violated your own values, but you cannot undo the action. So you build elaborate justifications to protect yourself from the truth. Rachel's justifications were her content, her comment section, her growing platform. But late at night, alone in her apartment, the justifications stopped working. She messaged me at 2:47 a.m. 3 words. You were right. I did not respond immediately. Not because I wanted to punish her. Because I needed her to sit with that recognition for more than a dopamine cycle. More than the length of time it takes to post and get validation. I needed her to feel the weight of it. 24 hours later, I sent her a single sentence. Now, the real work begins. Here is what I did not tell Rachel in that message. The real work was not going to be about fixing her external life. It was going to be about confronting what Nietzsche called the will to power. Not power over others. Power over yourself. The ability to choose difficulty. To embrace constraint. to stop performing weakness and start building capacity. Most people never do this work because it requires admitting that your suffering is not special, that your pain is not unique, that you are not a victim of circumstances, but an architect of them. Rachel had spent 8 months building an identity around being overwhelmed, around being a survivor, around being proof that the system was broken. And now she had to dismantle that identity piece by piece, with no guarantee that anything better would replace it. This is what Jung meant when he talked about the death and rebirth of the self. You cannot become someone new without letting the old version die. And most people would rather stay in familiar pain than risk unknown transformation. I told Rachel we were going to work on what I call the operational self. Not the self you perform, not the self you wish you were, the self that can handle Tuesday. Because here is the brutal truth that modern self-help does not want you to know. You do not think your way into a new life. You act your way into new thinking. Epictetus taught this 2,000 years ago. He said, you become a philosopher, not by reading philosophy, but by living according to its principles. Rachel had read plenty. She understood the concepts. She could explain shadow work and eternal recurrence and resentment. But she could not meal prep for 3 days. She could not create a budget and stick to it for a week. She could not put her phone down for 2 hours and just be present with her children. These are not small things. These are the foundation of everything. Nietzsche wrote that you must build your house on granite, on something solid and unchanging, not on sand, not on feelings. The granite is daily practice, repeated action, unsexy, unglamorous, completely unpostable discipline. I had Rachel start with one thing, one single commitment. Every night, before bed, the kitchen had to be clean, completely clean. Dishes washed, counters wiped, trash taken out. That was it. Nothing else. No meal planning, no budget spreadsheets, no custody strategy, just a clean kitchen every night. She lasted 4 days. On day 5, she was exhausted. She had worked a full day, dealt with a tantrum at pickup, made dinner, and she just wanted to collapse. She texted me a photo of her dirty kitchen with the caption, "I cannot do this tonight." I responded with one word, granite. She did the dishes. It took 12 minutes. But here is what happened in those 12 minutes that changed everything. She proved to herself that exhaustion is not inability, that tiredness is not the same as incapacity, that the voice in her head that says, "I cannot," is usually just saying, "I do not want to." This distinction is everything. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. But modern culture has inverted this completely. Now we are taught that our feelings are truth, that if we feel we cannot do something, then we cannot. This is psychological poison, because feelings are not facts. They are weather patterns. They pass, and if you wait for the feeling to change before you take action, you will never build anything. Rachel kept the kitchen clean for 30 days, and something started to shift, not in her circumstances, in her nervous system. When she woke up to a clean kitchen, her cortisol levels were lower. Her morning started with a small win instead of immediate overwhelm. When her children saw a clean kitchen, they felt safer, more secure, because it signaled that mom was in control, that the environment was being managed. This is what Jordan Peterson means when he talks about cleaning your room. He is not being literal. He is talking about establishing order in the domain you can control before you try to fix the world. After 30 days of a clean kitchen, I added the second commitment. Bedtime was now non-negotiable. Same time. Every night. No matter what. Rachel resisted this one harder, because bedtime was when she usually did her content, when she filmed her crying videos, when she processed her day by performing it. I told her the content could wait. The children could not. She fought me on this. She said her platform was growing, that she was building something, that the income mattered. I asked her a question I had been holding for weeks. If your daughter is in therapy at age 12 because her childhood was performance material for your TikTok, will the follower count have been worth it? She stopped responding for 3 days. When she came back, she had made a decision. She was going to stop posting about her children, stop posting about custody, stop performing her collapse. Her follower count dropped significantly. The brands stopped reaching out. The comments slowed down. The validation dried up. And Rachel had to sit with the silence. This is what Nietzsche meant by the abyss. When you stare into it, it stares back into you. When you remove the noise, you have to confront what is actually there. For Rachel, what was there was grief. Grief for the marriage she destroyed. Grief for the stability she traded. Grief for the version of her life that could have been if she had done the harder work of growing within commitment instead of running from it. This is the grief modern culture does not make space for, because it contradicts the narrative. The narrative says, leaving is always brave. Choosing yourself is always right. Authenticity always wins. But sometimes leaving is cowardice. Sometimes choosing yourself is choosing the easy dopamine hit over the hard character build. Sometimes authenticity is just selfishness with better branding. Rachel was starting to see this, and it was destroying her self-concept. But here is what she did not know yet. Destruction is not the end. It is the prerequisite. You cannot build on a false foundation. You have to tear it down first. And that process feels like death. Because in a way, it is. The person Rachel thought she was, the brave woman who chose herself, the survivor, the authentic voice, that person was dying. And someone new was being born. Someone less interested in being seen and more interested in being solid. Someone who understood that real power is quiet, that real strength is boring, that real growth happens in the 12 minutes you spend doing dishes when you would rather collapse. Month 9 was when Rachel stopped asking me for advice and started reporting results. Clean kitchen, check. Bedtime routine, check. Bills paid on time, check. Small things, undramatic things. But they were granite. And granite is what you build a life on. Now I need to tell you something I have not admitted until this moment. I failed Rachel before I helped her. In our first conversations back in month 1, I treated her like a case study, like a pattern to analyze. I was more interested in being right about the collapse than I was in preventing it. I gave her philosophy when she needed practical steps. I gave her Nietzsche when she needed a kitchen cleaning schedule. I assumed that intellectual understanding would prevent behavioral disaster. It did not, and I had to watch her fall apart for 8 months before I changed my approach. This is my shadow, the part of me that values being correct over being useful, that prioritizes theoretical purity over messy human reality. Carl Jung would say I was projecting my own need for intellectual superiority onto someone who needed basic life structure. He would be right. I am telling you this because the pattern I saw in Rachel exists in me too. The gap between understanding and execution. Between knowing what should be done and doing it. The difference is, I built my operational capacity before I built my philosophical framework. Rachel did it in reverse, and reverse does not work. You cannot think your way into discipline. You cannot understand your way into strength. You cannot philosophize your way into a life that functions. You have to build the boring foundation first. Then you can add the meaning later. This is what Nietzsche meant when he wrote about the Übermensch, the person who overcomes themselves, who masters their own nature before trying to master anything else. Rachel was trying to become extraordinary before she could be ordinary, trying to be authentic before she could be functional, trying to live philosophically before she could live practically. And the gap between those two states almost destroyed her. By month 10, something had fundamentally shifted. Rachel's content changed. Not because I told her to, because she ran out of material. When you stop performing your collapse, you stop having collapse to perform. She started posting about systems, about routines, about the unglamorous work of building stability. Her engagement dropped even further. Because competence is not algorithmically interesting. Growth is not as viral as pain. But something else happened. The people who stayed were different. They were not there to watch her suffer. They were there to learn from her recovery. This is the shift from consumption to contribution, from audience to community. The women who stayed started implementing her systems. They reported back. They shared their own wins, small, undramatic wins. I got my kitchen clean for 7 days straight. I made a meal plan and stuck to it. I said no to my children and did not apologize. These are not Instagram moments. These are the building blocks of a life that does not collapse. And Rachel was becoming the person who could teach them. Not because she had it all figured out, because she had walked through the collapse and come out the other side. This is what Robert Greene calls the law of transformation. You cannot teach what you have not lived. You cannot guide people through terrain you have not crossed yourself. Rachel had crossed it, and the crossing had changed her. By month 11, her ex-husband dropped the custody modification. Not because she hired a better lawyer, because the conditions that prompted the filing no longer existed. Their daughter's anxiety symptoms had decreased. Her grades had stabilized. She was sleeping through the night again. Because her mother had stopped being chaos and started being structure. This is the thing nobody wants to hear about modern independence. It is not about rights. It is not about freedom. It is not about authenticity. It is about capacity. Do you have the capacity to maintain order without external structure? Do you have the capacity to regulate yourself when nobody is regulating you? Do you have the capacity to be boring, consistent, and reliable day after day after day? If you do not, independence will destroy you, and it will destroy everyone who depends on you. Rachel now had that capacity, not because she was stronger than she was in month 1, because she had built different habits. Habits are not sexy. They are not authentic. They are not self-expressive. But they are the only thing that works. Aristotle said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence is not an act, but a habit. Modern culture has forgotten this completely. Now we think excellence is a feeling, a moment of inspiration, a bold choice. It is not. It is 12 minutes of dishes when you are exhausted. It is bedtime at the same time, even when you do not want to enforce it. It is paying the bill on time, even when you would rather spend the money on something that feels good. This is the operational self. The self that Nietzsche would call beyond good and evil, beyond feelings, beyond performance. The self that just does the work. Month 12 was when Rachel asked me a question I was not expecting. She asked if she should reach out to her ex-husband, not to get back together, to apologize for the chaos, for the performance, for using their children as content, for mistaking destruction for growth. I told her that was between her and her conscience. She did it anyway. He did not respond immediately. When he did, 3 days later, his message was short. I appreciate that. The kids are doing better. Let's keep focusing on that. No reconciliation, no dramatic reunion, no Hollywood ending, Just two adults being adults, putting children first, doing the boring work of co-parenting without turning it into a war. This is what Machiavelli would call effective power, not dramatic power, not performative power, power that produces results. Rachel's results were quiet. Her daughter's anxiety decreased. Her son's behavior at school improved. Her own nervous system regulated. She was not happy in the Instagram sense. She was not thriving in the aesthetic sense. But she was functional. She was solid. She was granite. And granite is what everything else gets built on. Now let me show you what this pattern means for you. Because Rachel's story is not unique. It is epidemic. And the mechanism that trapped her is trapping millions of people right now. I call it the sovereignty collapse. And understanding it will change how you see modern culture completely. The sovereignty collapse is not about weakness. It is about misunderstanding what strength actually is. Modern culture has convinced an entire generation that strength means never needing anyone, that independence means isolation, that sovereignty means having no obligations. This is the exact opposite of what Nietzsche taught. Nietzsche said the strong person is the one who can carry the heaviest burden without breaking, not the person who refuses to carry any burden at all. The sovereignty collapse happens when you confuse freedom from obligation with freedom to choose your obligations. These are not the same thing. Rachel thought she was choosing herself. What she was actually doing was refusing to choose anything, refusing to commit, refusing to be bound by promises she had made when she felt differently. This is what Nietzsche called the spirit of revenge, the resentment against time and its "it was," the inability to accept that past decisions have present consequences. You cannot undo the past. You can only move forward from where you are. And where Rachel was in month 1 was married with children. Those were facts, not feelings. But modern culture taught her that feelings trump facts, that if you feel trapped, you are trapped, that if you feel incomplete, your life is wrong. This is psychological fraud, because feelings are chemical weather. They change based on sleep, blood sugar, hormone cycles, and what you scrolled on your phone 10 minutes ago. If you make permanent decisions based on temporary feelings, you will destroy your life. This is exactly what Rachel did, and this is exactly what millions of people are doing right now. The second mechanism of the sovereignty collapse is what I call operational blindness. This is when you cannot see the invisible structure that makes your life possible. Rachel could not see everything her husband was handling. The mortgage payment that happened automatically, the car maintenance he scheduled, the insurance policies he managed, the retirement accounts he funded. She saw the parts of marriage that felt restrictive. She did not see the parts that were protective. This is what Jung meant by the shadow. The parts of reality you refuse to look at because acknowledging them would require you to change your behavior. Rachel's shadow was not her husband's flaws. It was her own dependence on the structure he provided. When that structure disappeared, she discovered she had no idea how to build it herself. Most people in the sovereignty collapse make the same discovery. And instead of admitting it, they perform outrage. They blame systems. They blame partners. They blame society. Anything except looking in the mirror and saying, "I was not prepared for this. I made a decision without understanding the cost." The third mechanism is what I call the authenticity trap. This is when you confuse self-expression with self-creation. Modern therapeutic culture says, be your authentic self. Follow your truth. Honor your feelings. But here is what they do not tell you. Your authentic self might be lazy, impulsive, short-sighted, weak. Following your truth might mean abandoning your children, destroying your finances, burning down everything you built. Honoring your feelings might mean never doing anything difficult, uncomfortable, or mature. Nietzsche understood this. He wrote that you must overcome yourself, that you must become who you are by destroying who you think you are. This is not self-expression. This is self-creation. And self-creation is violence. Violence against your own weakness, your own excuses, your own comfortable lies. Rachel was trying to express herself when she needed to create herself. She wanted to honor who she was when she needed to build who she could become. And the gap between those two projects is the difference between collapse and sovereignty. Real sovereignty is not freedom from constraint. It is the power to choose your constraints and then have the strength to honor them. Marriage is a constraint. Children are a constraint. Careers are a constraint. But constraints are not prisons. They are structure. And structure is what allows growth. A river without banks is not more free. It is a flood. Destructive, chaotic, temporary. A river with banks has direction, purpose, power. Rachel thought she was breaking free. What she was actually doing was flooding, and floods destroy everything in their path. The fourth mechanism is the one nobody talks about. I call it audience capture. This is when your identity becomes dependent on external validation. When you cannot separate who you are from how people respond to you. Rachel's collapse became her brand. Her pain became her product. Her struggle became her status. And once that happened, solving the struggle became economically and psychologically threatening. If she fixed her life, she lost her audience. If she became competent, she lost her community. If she stopped suffering, she stopped mattering. This is the trap of modern confessional culture. It rewards dysfunction. It monetizes weakness. It turns collapse into content. And once you are captured by that dynamic, escape requires walking away from attention, validation, and income. Most people cannot do it, because the addiction to being seen is stronger than the desire to be whole. Rachel did it, but only because hitting bottom was more painful than giving up the performance. Most people never hit bottom. They just sink slowly, posting about it the whole way down. Now, here is the part that will make you uncomfortable. This pattern is not just about women. It is not just about modern relationships. It is not just about Rachel. This pattern is about the core deception of modern culture. The lie that you can have freedom without discipline, power without responsibility, authenticity without strength. You cannot. Nietzsche knew this. Jung knew this. Marcus Aurelius knew this. Every philosophical tradition worth studying knows this. But we have built a culture that denies it. That calls discipline oppression. That calls responsibility patriarchy. That calls strength toxic. And the result is a generation of people who collapse when faced with ordinary adult life. Not because they are weak, because they were taught that strength is optional, that feelings are supreme, that wanting something makes you entitled to it. The sovereignty collapse is not a personal failure. It is a cultural crisis. And if you do not understand the mechanism, you will become another case study. Another person crying in their car about how hard life is. Another person performing their pain for validation. Another person who mistakes understanding philosophy for living it. So let me give you the framework I gave Rachel. The framework that took her from collapse to sovereignty in 12 months. I call it the operational triad, and it is the only thing that works. The operational triad is simple, brutally simple. It has 3 components. Master these, and you will not collapse. Ignore them, and you will. Component 1. Daily non-negotiables. These are the tasks that must happen every single day, regardless of how you feel. No exceptions, no negotiations with yourself. For Rachel, it was a clean kitchen before bed. Bedtime at the same time. Bills paid on time. That is it. 3 things. But those three things created the foundation for everything else. Here is why this works. When your life is chaos, your nervous system is in constant threat response. Your amygdala is scanning for danger. Your cortisol is elevated. Your prefrontal cortex is offline. Daily non-negotiables create predictability. And predictability signals safety. When your brain knows that certain things will definitely happen, it can stop scanning for threats and start planning for growth. This is basic neuroscience. But modern culture ignores it because discipline is not aesthetically interesting. Your daily non-negotiables should be boring, unsexy, completely unpostable. Because the goal is not to impress anyone. The goal is to build granite. Component 2. The competence ladder. This is a systematic approach to building skills you do not currently have. Most people avoid learning practical skills because they are embarrassed to be beginners. They would rather stay incompetent than look stupid while learning. This is ego protection. And ego protection keeps you weak. Rachel did not know how to change her own air filter. She did not know how to read a basic contract. She did not know how to negotiate with a contractor without getting taken advantage of. These are not advanced skills. These are adult basics. But she had never needed to learn them because someone else always handled it. The competence ladder is simple. Identify one practical skill you lack. Learn it. Practice it until it is automatic. Then move to the next one. Month by month, skill by skill. Until you are operationally independent. Not because you want to do everything yourself, because you want to know you could if you had to. This is the difference between chosen dependence and forced dependence. Chosen dependence is partnership. Forced dependence is weakness. Epictetus taught that the only true freedom is mastery over what is within your control. You do not control whether your car breaks down, but you control whether you know what to do when it does. Build the competence ladder, and you will never be at the mercy of people who sense your desperation. Component 3. The reality audit. This is the most painful component, and the most necessary. Every month, you sit down and audit your life against objective reality. Not your feelings about your life, not your narrative about your life. The actual measurable facts. Are you paying your bills on time? Are your children's needs being met? Is your living space functional? Are you keeping your commitments? Yes or no? No justifications. No explanations. Just facts. Rachel resisted this for weeks because the reality audit destroys your ability to lie to yourself. You cannot claim you are thriving when the audit shows you are 3 months behind on rent. You cannot claim you are being a good mother when the audit shows your children are in crisis. The reality audit forces you to see what is actually there. Not what you wish were there. Not what you are performing for others. What is actually happening in your life. This is what Nietzsche meant by amor fati, love of fate, acceptance of what is, not in a passive sense, in an active sense. You cannot change what you refuse to see. The reality audit makes the invisible visible, and once it is visible, you can act on it. These 3 components, daily non-negotiables, competence ladder, reality audit, create what I call operational sovereignty. This is different from emotional sovereignty, different from financial sovereignty, different from any other kind of sovereignty modern culture talks about. Operational sovereignty means you can handle Tuesday, every Tuesday, for the rest of your life, without collapsing, without performing, without needing rescue. This is the foundation. Everything else is decoration. Now here is what I need you to understand about Rachel's story. She is not special. She is not unusual. She is not an outlier. She is the pattern. Millions of people are in month 3 of their own sovereignty collapse right now, performing strength while barely functioning, broadcasting authenticity while drowning in chaos. And they do not know how to stop, because stopping means admitting the whole thing was a mistake. But here is the truth that will set you free if you can accept it. Admitting the mistake is not the end. It is the beginning. You do not have to stay collapsed because you chose collapse. You do not have to keep performing because you started performing. You can stop. You can rebuild. You can become operationally sovereign. But it requires something modern culture does not want to give you. It requires you to accept that your feelings do not matter more than your responsibilities, that your authenticity does not override your obligations, that your truth does not change objective reality. This is not oppression. This is physics. Gravity does not care about your truth. Bills do not care about your authenticity. Your children's nervous systems do not care about your journey of self-discovery. Reality is indifferent, and indifferent reality is the ultimate teacher. Nietzsche wrote that what does not kill you makes you stronger. But he did not mean trauma makes you strong. He meant that facing difficulty without collapsing builds capacity. And capacity is the only thing that matters. Not your story, not your performance, not your follower count. Your capacity to function when functioning is difficult. Your capacity to choose discipline when you feel like quitting. Your capacity to be granite when everything around you is chaos. Rachel built that capacity, not because she wanted to, because she had to, and now she has something most people never get. She has the knowledge that she can survive her own mistakes, that she can fall apart and rebuild, that she can walk through the sovereignty collapse and come out the other side. This is not strength you are born with. This is strength you build, brick by brick, day by day, 12 minutes of dishes at a time. If you are in the sovereignty collapse right now, here is what I want you to do. Stop performing it. Stop posting about it. Stop looking for validation that it is not your fault. Start with one daily non-negotiable, one single commitment that happens every day no matter what. Not because it will fix everything, because it will prove to you that you can keep one promise to yourself. And that one promise is the first brick of granite. Build from there. This is the shadow mind. And if this breakdown revealed something you needed to see, you know what to do. Do not subscribe because you like the content. Subscribe because you are ready to build operational sovereignty. Because you are done performing collapse and ready to build capacity. The work is not inspirational. It is not aesthetic. It is not going to go viral. But it is the only thing that works. I will see you in the next breakdown. Now go do your dishes. Big shout out to all our channel members for going the extra mile. A special shout out to our new Inner Circle member, Up Purington. You all rock.